Welcome, everybody. We are back after a break with some globetrotting. And today we're here to start digging into more bottlenecks. The topic for today is the delegation trap, or why leaders become the bottleneck. Having onboarded a couple of founders in the last 2 weeks, it is revealing, really revealing in their language, in the way they talk about their business, the way they talk about their customers, some of the words they use for team, that they are struggling because they just don't have the systems in place that actually make things doable, runnable, repeatable. I think founders are incredibly courageous and very, very trusting people in the way that they'll say, hey, you seem like the right person, join me on this. And then they don't take that critical next step to put the SOP in and the system and the process and all that stuff. And having spoken to someone who was a 64-year-old business owner yesterday, when your stuff lives in your head, it becomes very difficult to hand things off or really put your business into a growth mode or a steadiness mode, or I can afford to take a breath mode. All leadership is the ceiling of every single organization that I've ever experienced. It doesn't seem to matter on the size. And today we're here to talk about what delegation is, what an outcome is, how to think about an outcome and not just to-do lists and tasks, and then how to dig into the structures that let your team actually do things and give them permission to do their job. Tools and the permission. Delegation always fails when systems are unclear. Founders are the bottleneck. It's not an accident. It just happens. And that's what being a visionary is, unfortunately. But most importantly, I think learning how to delegate an outcome instead of a bunch of instructions is probably the biggest place that things break down. So yeah, let's start freeing these people up and help them get the stuff off their shoulders and out into the rest of the organization. Where would you guys like to start? Thank you.
I want to start and just say, I think that the biggest problem with all of this is the mindset. And typically it's around the value of other people versus the value of the founder, and where the founder derives their value if they're not directly involved in the day-to-day operations of whatever it is the business is doing. A lot of times, what I've observed is that they get into trouble when they stop seeing the value, or rather when that, how do I say this? The trouble comes when they feel like the only value they can deliver to the team is by doing direct daily operations. And that's just completely backward if they want to scale their organization. Their value actually comes from their ability to examine the problems behind scaling, not do the actual work.
Very well said.
Sounds like you're saying you can't scale a single human being, Zach.
You might think that. You might think that.
Right.
I love this article. It's probably former CEO of LinkedIn now, but he published this in his blog years ago, and he said the most valuable time of my week is these 2 hours when my admin person comes into my office, turns off my computer, takes away my phone, turns the chair from my desk towards a blank wall, and my job is to sit there and stare at that wall for 2 hours. And the question I have about that is like, and what if that ended up being 10 hours? Like 2 a day, 5 days a week? If this is the most productive time, then wouldn't more of that potentially be more productive? I don't know if you ever tested it, but what's it take to know that everything's going to be all right and things are going to keep running while you take your eyes off the road?
So one of the biggest concerns that I have about that is that there is eventually a point of diminishing returns.
Yeah.
And I think that part of what's going on is that the founders get pulled into a lot of different, like putting out fires and doing a lot of the minutia. Like I worked with a CEO who he was basically acting as a glorified office manager, like literally ordering office supplies for the team. And he was the CEO of a seven-figure company. It's like you have an executive assistant slash secretary for a reason. Like, why aren't you using them? Like that I think is what we're talking about. Not necessarily, you know, only think about the problems, but rather like focus your time where it has the greatest return and recognize that you do have to unstring the bow occasionally.
Yeah. Couple things here. Let's go back to the military. Your job as a leader in the military is to make yourself obsolete so that when you get killed on the battlefield, it's not a problem.
Right.
Right?
Exactly.
So when leaders in corporate America are serving their ego through power and control, rather than trusting, creating psychological safety, developing, right, empowering their people, right? That's really what they're doing. They're not making themselves obsolete. They're creating dependency.
Yeah.
They're centralizing accountability and control, except they want to move all the blame then to other to protect themselves, right?
Yes.
That's not delegating, right? If you want to create the psychological safety, I would say, Maria, here's the task. Do you think you could take ownership of this? I'd listen for her feedback. Leave the door open. I understand this is a bit of a stretch for you, right? But I think you can do it with a little bit of support. I'll be here to help coach, whatever, resources as you need. But if you could take on the responsibility for driving this, I would greatly appreciate that. She said, oh, yeah, if that's the way we're going to do it, then absolutely, yes. Okay. Right? She's happy to. And then she grew and she developed, right? And I didn't have to do the ticky-tack LMS administration work.
Yeah.
Right?
Dan Martell has a fantastic chapter on this in his book, Buy Back Your Time. And he created a line, and every, I guess, manager in a role has a budget below that line and a corporate card with the, if you think there's a tool that'll fix this, go buy it and test it. Don't even bother asking. I trust you to know more about this than I do. And then bigger decisions, have to move up, but just knowing the when and the where of things and having that I trust you, I think is a critical element.
Well, let's go yes and with that.
Mm-hmm.
Say taken to the nth degree, that can go horribly wrong, right? Because if everyone goes and buys their own LMS in a company, and you have 36 LMSs and you have 200 people every Monday morning who do all the hires and fires manually because you did zero integration, right? You've now created an IT nightmare that is wasteful. And if I were a shareholder in that company, I'd be embarrassed, right? That you let it become that. So
yeah,
it depends on what they're buying with said P card.
Mm-hmm.
Let us not all buy all the software we want all the time.
No, very true.
So,
well, and I think again, there's always a level of diminishing returns on things like this.
right.
Like ultimately what I think we're going back and forth about, and it can feel kind of like tricky, is what is the overall job of a leader? And I think that's the real question that you need to ask if you're going to actually effectively delegate any work that you're doing. Is what is the job of a leader? Is the job of a leader to set vision? Is the job of a leader to serve the employees? Is the job of the leader to know every single skill set that employees have? Like, ultimately, what is the job of a leader? Because that's going to impact how you do decide to delegate and whether or not you delegate effectively, which is, the real question at hand here.
So let's maybe get everybody's take on that. What is the job of a leader? Because one of my answers to that question is to make whatever they do more valuable to the customer.
I like that. I've
What
always
else
looked
needs
at
to be added to it?
Well, I've always looked at leadership as the bridge, particularly in a corporate sense, the bridge between customer value and employee value, right? So making sure that employees are deriving value from their work experience while also delivering value, setting the course for where the company is going. So not just being a manager, right? A paper pusher, but someone who is actually setting the agenda for the future for the team, so they can feel confident that yes, someone has this. We're not just kind of oozing through time and space trying to figure out where we go next. And that is surprisingly difficult and incredibly important for a team if they're ever going to trust and really excel. And so, like in the teams that I've led in the past, I've been very, very clear that my job for you, the employee, is to make sure you make more money than you've ever made before, while also making sure that quality is there for the customer. Those two things. If I've done those two things, then I feel like I can hold my head up as a successful um, leader of this team. But the rest of the other stuff, the KPI monitoring, all of that, in my opinion, is just an appendage to that ultimate job of making sure that my team is well fed.
I guess it changes, the definition changes a bit as you move up and down the organization and across the organization. So in a sales org, totally agree, Zach. Totally agree. When you get to an ops leadership position, it changes quite a bit because the risk to personal injury often goes up great. So we talk more about, until I don't have the choice, my job as your leader is to make sure everyone gets to go home at night with all their appendages. Right?
Well, but I think that also kind of depends on the definition of operations, right? Like in an industrial operations capacity, absolutely. I need to make sure everyone is safe. In a military capacity, absolutely. Everybody needs to be able to walk home at the end of this mission. In a um, in a software capacity, I'm not necessarily sold that is
exactly.
very different from what I just laid out. But maybe that's just my ego feeling bruised that someone would dare disagree with me.
Well, it's a yes and, right? It's that it changes as you move across the organization.
Yeah,
The visioning has to happen at the top. Tactical thinking has to happen at the next level down. True
exactly.
operationalization, getting ticky-tack and setting goals happens at the next line down, right? So We got to strive to put the right people at the right level, not promote the best performer, but the young visionary, right, who's challenging upwards. Where's the vision? Where's the vision? Here's how I see it, using that kind of language, right? The insecure leader won't delegate to them, won't involve them. The insecure leader is threatened by them, right? They don't create a path, they create a path out, right? So it's just, again, we're into bad leadership, doesn't delegate, among the many other things that they do. It's mostly fear and ego based. Really secure servant leaders, right? Situational leaders, competent people leaders. Lead sales teams, as Zach is saying, lead ops teams, as I'm saying. You lead your software team with openness and psychological security. You ask questions like, what are we missing? Right? How could this go wrong? And what are we going to do about it? A little bit of contingency planning. When you hand off work, you do it at the task level. And you have a discussion about it. Like I said earlier, what resources do you think you need? I'm here to help if needed.
Mm-hmm.
Who else could I connect you with who could coach you through this? And then we're going to have regular check-ins to see how it's going, so no one gets surprised, so we don't fail prematurely or too badly.
Well, and notice what you're doing again is that you're eating last as the leader. You're making sure that the people on your team that you are responsible for feel like you actually care about them,
Right.
heaven forbid,
That's
and
right.
like you have their best interests at heart. So again, my job is to make sure you do the best job you possibly can, and that at the end of the day, the customer is getting more value than they've ever gotten before, and you are wildly successful. But again, it's facilitating everybody else's success
That's right.
and setting a vision for where to go next. But the thing that's tricky about that is how do you actually define vision in this sort of context? Because a lot of people think that and sort of idolize Steve Jobs as this great visionary, and they don't understand that the guy was actually kind of a dick, and that the only thing that he did really well, or that is worthy of sort of worthy of replication or impression, is he found people, hired people who were smarter than himself, and how do I say this? He enabled them. And so it's like a lot of people idolize Steve Jobs, or sort of the dick visionary, as I would call them, without even understanding that why on earth would you idolize this person? Like they're focused on the wrong thing, or the wrong reasons.
I thought you were going to go a whole different direction with that, Zach.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Because Steve Jobs is a techie, right?
Well, Steve Jobs may be a techie, but that doesn't necessarily grant him immunity to being a dick.
I agree. But the preponderance of social skills among the tech crowd is arguable.
True.
Same in engineering.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So how does delegation get scaled is one of the questions I have, because, there's some really clear language and ideas about saying, hey, this person's going to let go of control, and then there's going to be these different other individuals who are trusted, who are brought in because they're good, great, brilliant at, but that creates another layer,
Well,
right? How does
Yes.
this make its way all the way down?
the principle that does this is that you shall push all work to the lowest level at which it can be done. Always, always, always. So if I need this grenade to go into that machine gun nest, lieutenant, staff sergeant, gunnery, we don't do it. That's not the way. Nope. Nope, that's not who does this. You hand it to the corporal hands it to the lance corporal, hands it to the PFC. The PFC looks around and says, are there any privates around? Nope, guess it's me. I'm the lowest
Right.
guy. My job,
Right.
and goes and gets it done, right?
Right.
So it's
Well, and
same concept.
I just want to build on that because I think that that's really actually very important. Because what you're doing by doing that is you're enabling other people to really learn to function at a higher level, right? You're giving them skill sets. So the type of leader that I always strive to be is one who asks my team, okay, what do you want to do?
Right.
Where do you want to go next?
Oh,
Well, I want to do this. I want to be that. Great. Then let's find a way to make that happen.
yes.
Mhm.
Yes. Where do you see yourself in 3 to 5 years? Let's write a plan.
Yeah.
Wow. Because once you have that foundation, 2 weeks from then, when you ask if you could delegate something, if they could take something off your desk, how much more likely is their answer to be yes?
Absolutely.
Well, and not only that, but because you will have taught them that stuff, they can actually do it. Because like you talked about, you've passed these skills down to the lowest person possible, essentially.
Exactly. Yep. To the lowest level they can be done at. Always, always, always.
Yes.
Do not word credit. Give credit, right? Be magnanimous about it, right? Being greedy does nothing but foster resentment and ruin engagement, right? The more credit you give credit to yourself. So delegate, celebrate, train, develop, engage, watch the results. It's real.
Let's talk a little bit more about outcome, right? Because that's a major thing that I think is missing. As people start to think about systems, they consider operationalizing, they tend to default to list making and tasking instead of outcome-based stuff. So how do you engineer for that? How do you make that a first principle?
I think the outcomes are the fusion between that vision and mission at the very top,
Mhm.
and then how that becomes your balanced scorecard, and we start to include the customer perspective as well as the employee perspective. So if we want all those outcomes, or even the outcomes on the SQDC board, I always want to start with the outcomes in mind. When people write their SMART goals, their STRAM goals, depending which model you believe in, the measures are always in terms of either in-process business outcomes or terminal business outcomes, end of pipe or mid pipe, right? Depends where you are. If you can get your org to buy into making the org outcome part of everyone's responsibility, that's an even greater thing to do, right? Like if we hit the sales number this year, well, then we're all going to get this whatever bonus. But Jacob, I work in HR. I don't even work in sales. Why is that part of my goal? Right? People will complain.
Yeah.
Well, you do something to impact that at some point, or you wouldn't be here, right?
Absolutely.
Your mom works in sales. No, everybody works in sales. This is something that people need to realize. Everybody works in sales, just like everybody works in operations and everybody works in accounting and HR. You may not specialize in it, but you are just as responsible for all of this stuff as every other member of your team.
Right.
It's not an isolated sort of thing. You can't just turn off, oh, well, good service isn't my responsibility because I am not responsible for customer service. Bull. Everyone is responsible for customer service. Everyone is responsible for sales, because if they have a bad experience after they have the closed deal, what's going to happen? They're going to walk away, and you will have been responsible for the company losing that revenue. You would have been responsible for that sale.
Absolutely.
Yep. What outcomes were you thinking of, Jacob?
Well, I default to that customer journey stuff, right? Like businesses are grown through recurring revenue and lifetime value.
Right.
So when we create a principle around that, if we want one buzzword for the entire thing, loyalty. Okay, the customers are loyal to the service or product. The team is loyal to both the service or product and the customer. They want it to be a good thing for them that they love, so they stay. And so, I'm not saying that's the be all end all, but I give it a large percentage of the value of the thing in the end, because, it comes down to the quality of your systems, the strength of your brand, and the size of your list. When you really are saying how much is this business worth, and the willingness to say this is our North Star, right? I'm just using my own language to repeat the stuff that the two of you were just saying. Everyone's in customer service, right? Everyone is fulfilling some sort of a role to that end user while playing the same game, ideally on the same team. And I think that's one of the things that we see a lot of, is how different parts of an organization are playing, unfortunately, different sports. And it just kind of gets crazy sometimes to walk in there and be like solicited for help and be like, okay, but this part is playing hockey and that part's playing football.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I heard a very clear story yesterday about somebody's experience with an account manager, where they liked the company and they liked what they were getting from it, but the amount of distaste from this interaction with this one person who probably shouldn't have been in that role burned it forever.
I've had similar experiences on the sales end of the spectrum, where
Absolutely.
and this was like, you'd think that they would really care about this, because this was high ticket sales, and I'm not talking like the coach, like the fake guru, like, oh, I'm in high ticket sales, I charge $10,000 a thing. No, this is like $250,000 sales. Like, this is not chump change. And you'd think that they would care more about everything that was going on. and making sure that they weren't going to alienate anybody, but they didn't. They actually had people on the team who were like literally turning these potential purchasers off of the deal just because they were such jerks and such novices. And that was the head of the team. And so it's like people don't get this stuff. Like it can be bad. It can really impact the experiences. And this manager was literally chasing away, you know, sometimes 7-figure deals just because of their ego. And eventually that manager was replaced with someone who was far better in the role. But for a lot of these deals, it was far too late. You know, that the sales team was like super pissed because this guy had cost them some major deals and commissions and things like that.
Yeah. Should have delegated.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Anything else to help people wrap this up, weave this together, and ideally take something away that can turn into action?
I think to end on a positive, right? I have, both in the military and in corporate life, been completely pleasantly surprised when somebody took something I delegated and actually delivered a better result than I was expecting.
Yeah.
Right? So if you trust and you properly resource, support, and coach, they're like, hey, what do you think of this? I'm like, well, that's freaking fantastic.
Yes.
Right? Like, yay. A+, great job. Hooray. Right? Pat them on the back. I thought you said you weren't so good at this.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things I want to point out about that, though, is like you weren't setting them up for failure. So you were properly resourcing them. You knew exactly what you needed them to do. So I imagine as you were explaining, you know, what should be happening, you were very clear, like, nope, you're going to have this level of resources. This is the expectation for what it needs to look like when it's done. You know, you were providing material support. And by material support, I don't just mean like you were giving them your credit card and saying, here you go, solve the problem.
Right.
Like you were actually there, like giving them clarity, which is honestly a lot of times more important than just a credit card.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Delegating to outcome.
Yeah. So if people learn to do this, they might be pleasantly surprised with better outcomes than were originally intended. It's kind of crazy.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, cool. Thank you both for your time and just the insights and the ideas here. And appreciate you. And we'll see you next week.
Awesome. See you next week.